Hello everyone and welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God video, and today I want to talk about a topic that is quite controversial, especially among some of the top players in the game right now. And as many of you guys know, that is the release of the Crown Blueprint coming with Month of the Mad God. And if the reason for it being such a controversial release is not readily apparent to you, let me explain. For the past few years now in Realm of the Mad God, the DPS meta has been basically running the show. If you have DPS items, you can get into more exclusive raids, into more exclusive discords, and to more exclusive runs for high tier dungeons. And Crown is the epitome of a high DPS item, giving you +6 attack and +6 dex once its new release is out. Now, as most of you guys also probably know if you've been sticking around the game for a little while, the Forge has been in the game for a little while, and this has allowed you to craft basically any DPS item in the game except for the Crown. Cola Sword was available for a monthly campaign, and every other mini-boss wight for Oryx 3, as well as all Oryx 3 items, are available through just playing the game normally. So with essentially every other item in the game being craftable normally, what makes the Crown so much worse? With the Shatters being the only dungeon to not have blueprint drops right now, there was a lot of debate over whether or not it would ever have it in general. And with the Shatters rework coming out soon, it would make sense to me, at least, for it to exist. But the controversy comes from this, and I'll have Sebchuf describe some of this argument in a post he made on his YouTube community tab. To paraphrase a little bit, basically the last item white bag that could get me hyped because it was rare and couldn't be crafted is getting a blueprint from this year's Month of the Mad God campaign. Yes, another RotMG campaign. Basically, the rest of Seb's statement goes on to say how, with all the time and effort he's put into the game, the Crown has essentially become almost valueless because he can craft one every 5 days for the next 3 months if he just logs in every day, which is a fair and valid point. He then talks about how the dungeon looks really fun, and since he's been grinding Lost Souls for the past 2 years, he can just craft all of the new items, and so it may take a little bit of the joy of the grind out of the new dungeon for him. And this side of the argument is completely valid and makes a lot of sense. But to play devil's advocate, I'm going to talk about the other side, and then after the other side, where I personally stand on the whole issue. On the other end of the spectrum, the vast majority of the player base does not just have a bunch of white stockpiled and sitting around waiting to be crafted. Rather, they're just trying to get white bags from the in-game dungeons, just in general, to be able to use on characters, or just to finally say that I've gotten that white bag. I personally remember being in some of Sebchuf's old streams when he would grind over 700 Lost Halls just to never get the Cola Sword that he so desired. And at that time, he was calling for this system to exist, or at least some form of system to be in place in order to get the particular item you desired. With all other in-game bosses though, there are multiple items that can be dropped per boss. With the Shatters though, there is one item per boss, and the Crown being the one from the Forgotten King, the final boss of the Shatters. So that means if you do eventually get a white bag from grinding enough Shatters, that it's guaranteed to be a Crown. You're getting the item you desired. But that argument does kind of get undermined when you can still get the white bags from the other two bosses in the Shatters, which are significantly less desirable, if you could say that. So the whole argument boils down to, is the item better off being hard to get and super hype whenever you get it, or being usable and more accessible by the average player, but still requiring some grind to get it? So where do I stand? Well, I personally think that the Forge system as implemented was flawed, and I think that the Crown, implemented in the way that it's being implemented, is not a bad thing on its own. But I will say, I think the Forge system should have been implemented a little bit differently. I think every item should have been open to craft by default, but you could only craft using items from the same dungeon, which makes it to where you have to grind the dungeon that you want the item from in order to get the item, which to me makes a lot of sense. I also think that every dungeon should have had a pity drop implemented, so if you do a certain amount of a certain boss, which they can easily track, and you don't get a white bag in a certain amount of time, well, then you're guaranteed to get at least one from that boss after a certain period of time. In the case of the Shatters though, I think the pity should only work for the entire dungeon rather than any individual boss, because it'd be kind of weird to do 300 Shatters and get a white from each one back to back to back. With that being said though, if you do get a Shatters white, then you'll be much closer to acquiring the one that you really do want, or if you get one that you're happy with, then you can still rock with it. So in conclusion, I do think that the crown blueprint should be added to the game. But I do think that the forge system in itself, the way it was implemented, was not done very well. With that being said, players who have grinded the game excessively more than others are in a very unique position compared to that of the average player base, where if a player that has the option to forge a crown gets a crown, it'll still likely be very hyped because they got a crown that they didn't have to forge and spend 4 legendary white bags to get. Players like Sebchuf and others along those lines have grinded out hundreds of in-game white bags and have no desire to necessarily grind out the item itself because they can just craft it at any time if they really wanted to. The last point I want to talk about is what impact does it really have on the majority of the players and how they play the game. And honestly, I think it enables them to do the dungeons they want more and allows them to play with sets that they would enjoy more. It allows them to speedrun easier because they can get access to items that otherwise are super hard to get, as well as allows them to join in raids that otherwise they might not be able to. So, with that being said, it's all a matter of which one you value more, and that's why the argument may never be solved. Do you value the quality of the player experience as far as playing the game goes? Or do you value that feeling of getting a white bag from that dungeon? And it's really up to you. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, because I think it's very fair and valid to feel either side. And so with that being said, I want to open it up to a discussion. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'll have a lot more videos coming soon that are a lot better produced, as well as have some really cool storylines. So if you do enjoy my style of commentary, and you want to see it more fleshed out and better made, feel free to leave a sub and like the video to see more in the future. Alright, peace.